What's the state of Bitcoin in 2020? Bitcoin's come a far way since 2009. The space has evolved so much, which I'm going to go over in these videos moving forward here. Today we're just going to talk about kind of where we've been and what's going on in 2020 will be our focus. In 2009, when Bitcoin was released, unconstitutional intrusions by the NSA were in the headlines. Bitcoin was adopted by the American Libertarian Movement pretty early on in its existence, which was why there was somewhat of an anti-communist sentiment in this movement early on, at least from my perspective. Um, since 2017 alone, we've seen the price of Bitcoin increase to $20,000 in December of 2017, thereafter collapsing to $3,000. Ahead of the third halving, which we just saw, Bitcoin was just under $10,000. And I think a lot of us believe that the next decade could really surprise a lot of people, not only on the crypto front, I would argue, but also in the alternative asset front generally. And that includes gold and silver, precious metals. So while privacy and fungibility is important in cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, I would argue that when it comes to Bitcoin, that there are only 21 million coins that will ever be printed or created is even more important. Bitcoin was released during the banking bailouts of 2008-2009, during the first quantitative easing operations ever on the planet, and by many it was really seen as a response to that, the deflationary nature in particular. We know the emission rate of Bitcoin, 21 million. That we have mathematical proofs is an attractive feature in Bitcoin, more important than fungibility and anonymity. That's not to discount those two aspects, though, which help protect us against censorship. It helps us wield something, anything, a monetary system in this case, against political opponents. Things like Operation Choke Point, which was a banking blockade of WikiLeaks, which ultimately saw Satoshi disappear and vanish from BitcoinTalk.org. Private and fungible technologies make it more difficult to engage in censorship. And we're seeing censorship on social media today on platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, etc. Development is healthy in Bitcoin in 2020. There are hundreds and hundreds of open source developers working on the Bitcoin core software. The Bitcoin core software is the backbone of the Bitcoin network. It's the most widely deployed implementation for all the network consensus. Around the time that I wrote this text, there were about 760 issues open on GitHub and 359 pull requests on the GitHub repository, which you can find at github.com/bitcoin/bitcoin. There you can see on display all of the ongoing Bitcoin development. We've got Lightning Network, which introduces channel factories and private messages on Bitcoin's second layer. We've got Blockstream's atomic swaps on Liquid, which is a sidechain-based settlement network for traders and exchanges. We've got Blockstream's Elements, which is an open-source sidechain capable of blockchain platform, which provides access to powerful features such as confidential transactions and issued assets. Then there's RSK, which makes possible on a second layer development of smart contracts. On the mining front, we have the Fiber Network for connecting all the miners. Matt Corallo is working on Stratum version 2 protocol. Quote, "This is going to make it a lot better for individual miners to control how the blocks get created instead of the mining pool screening it." Then there's mining derivatives, hashing contracts, which will likely trade on a CFTC regulated swap execution facility, perhaps. On the privacy front, particularly when it comes to confidential transactions, there's CoinJoin, Mimblewimble, Dandelion, Bulletproof, which makes shorter proofs for more efficient confidential transactions a reality. There's Snicker, which mixes coins, it's coin mixing technology, as well as Value Shuffle, which is another coin mixing technology. Then there's MAST, which is Merkleized Abstract Syntax Tree for smaller transaction sizes, more privacy, and larger smart contracts. Then there's Taproot for expanding Bitcoin smart contract flexibility. There's Graphroot, TapScript, which improves Bitcoin script structure. That is the coding language that was created by Satoshi Nakamoto for Bitcoin, which has limited functionality, which is seen as a strength by proponents of Bitcoin. We've got performance and usability increases, Schnorr-Singer signature cross-input aggregation, multisig, neutrino, airlay, and transaction accumulators. There's things like BTC Pay for merchants to accept Bitcoin with open source software. It's free, unlike BitPay, which even then BitPay only charges 1%. It is such a formidable option for merchants compared to all the other ones. And there's no chargebacks. There's so much innovation happening on Bitcoin, but people are largely ignorant of that. They're mostly focusing on the innovation taking place on Ethereum, which I understand. But keep in mind, Ethereum keeps having to make major upgrades or changes to that system, which has cascading effects that people don't like to talk about. Many people are not following the Bitcoin development space in 2020, but it's going forward like never before. Now, in 2020, are state actors looking at undermining Bitcoin? It's certainly in the realm of game theory of Bitcoin. A lot of people argue that these systems are just too inconsequential. I don't know if that's true. I think that there's probably a lot of energy and attention by global intelligence agencies into these platforms, ways in which to control them and command them. And I think that while the space speaks a lot about Wall Street adoption of crypto, Wall Street adoption of Bitcoin, etc., big tech adoption of blockchain, we are rather seeing co-optation. These companies are commercially adopting, which is a major storyline of history, Bitcoin, blockchain, and crypto technology. They're not adopting, they're co-opting. And it's real important that we understand this difference, because at some point during the lifespan of the cryptocurrency industry, the blockchain industry, I'll posit it at around 2017 during the ICO boom, there was a switch where the space went from anti-legacy financial institutions to pro-legacy financial institutions, and a desire to partner with these financial institutions and augment the already existing system instead of defeat the already existing financial system. There is no greater fight for equality than undermining the legacy financial institutions. And early on in its existence, Bitcoin was naive, idealistic enough to believe that there could be an alternative system completely built, not by extending olive branches to Wall Street, but by reaching out directly to the people themselves and a financial system of the people. And unfortunately, we've lost our way on that front. So, could state actors try to undermine Bitcoin? I think that this is a bigger threat than we know. A lot of the mining in Bitcoin is already done in China. And who's to say that state couldn't just nationalize all of the mining in Bitcoin? That would not kill Bitcoin, by the way. That might have implications for pricing. It certainly would have implications for Bitcoin allocation, that is BTC allocation, but I don't think it would kill. However, long term, it's something that unfortunately not enough people are discussing. So Bitcoin, though, is built in a very force multiplier type of manner so that it's difficult to try and hack it. There's been a $150 billion bounty on the Bitcoin network for about 11 years now, and there's yet to be a significant hack. So over time, as many proponents argue, Bitcoin gets stronger and stronger, and any potential weaknesses keep getting further reinforced and strengthened. So the thinking then is that by the time that it might matter for a state actor to try and hack it, it'll be way too big, and all of those potential weaknesses will have already been closed off and defended against. But what if our public knowledge of the computing processing power that's on planet Earth is 50 years behind what's actually classified? What if the Chinese Communist Party decided to shut down the many Chinese-based Bitcoin mines, which helped to secure the Bitcoin network? Proponents of Bitcoin who argue this is not a concern say that the geographic distribution diversity of Bitcoin mining has only increased over time. In the past, they've cited projects by like Bitmain, who was opening up a Bitcoin mine in Texas. That was scrapped. There's version 2 Stratum protocol, which we discussed a little bit earlier, which some argue is going to make it even more distributed Bitcoin mining, with the individual or retail miners being able to control what happens in terms of transactions that go into blocks rather than the pool operator controlling that. So this will empower individual miners. China still, I believe, houses a lot of mining power. Some will say that's just old news and that it's overplayed, because there's massive Bitcoin mines in South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, Canada, Iceland, and Denmark, and the Netherlands. But if you see that up in Wenatchee, Washington, which is a place which had a lot of Bitcoin mines, the city council has kind of cracked down on this sort of stuff, and they're trying to charge the Bitcoin miners there extra compared to a lot of the commercial businesses in this region, which then undermines this movement in North America for there to be Bitcoin mining. And it's real important for there to be Bitcoin miners, particularly in the United States, because here in the United States, there is a constitution that I would argue is more empowering for the people than any other constitution on the planet in all time. You know, you might raise me the Magna Carta or something, but today we've got the U.S. Constitution. We've also got the Bill of Rights. This means we've got the rule of law, freedom of speech, and we for now have cheap power, although it's certainly not as cheap as in China. It's really important that Bitcoin mining takes place in North America and in particular the United States. It's really important that miners protect themselves to the greatest degree possible from state interference, and the U.S. more or less has a more lawful way of dealing with miners than, say, China, for example. You know, in recent history, we've seen the financialization of Bitcoin. I would say that while a lot of people say this is a good thing, we never wanted early on Bitcoin to be financialized. We wanted Bitcoin to be outside of the dominant financial system. But there's just so much at stake today in terms of riches that people are open to now extending olive branches and negotiating with Wall Street, which has a sordid history. We see products like Bakkt, which provides Bitcoin futures. However, Bakkt initially claimed they would be physically settled and physically backed, yet they ended up only offering 37% backing. That poses a grave risk to Bakkt participants. When they have to deliver these Bitcoins one day in the midst of a violent price move, they're not going to be able to just print Bitcoins like you can print Federal Reserve notes. There's other products increasing this financialization of Bitcoin. There's an ETP product in Switzerland called SIX. There's another product in Canada that's now trading on their public exchanges. That one's called 31Q, which is a Bitcoin fund. And then there's Ledger X. So Ledger X is the first federally regulated exchange and clearinghouse to list and clear fully collateralized, physically settled Bitcoin swaps and options for the institutional market. The U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which regulates virtual currency derivatives, oversees Ledger X's registration as a swap execution facility and derivatives clearing organization. This is seen as a way for people with Bitcoin to earn more Bitcoin. They sell the volatility, essentially. And they're 100% collateralized, unlike Bakkt. Many argue that this is very good because it increases the financialization and network effect of Bitcoin, thereby increasing the liquidity and reinforcing the first network effect of the speculation. So this background is also going to create more opportunities for the retail market. And so I think a lot of proponents in Bitcoin, they're going to be keeping an eye on these financial products from Bakkt and SIX and Ledger X. But there's also on the legislative front a lot of great news. And I think this is actually more important and more enticing to me than what's going on Wall Street. Forget Wall Street. I'm more interested in like our local leaders and elected leaders and how they view Bitcoin and blockchain generally, particularly Bitcoin. And you see Wyoming enacted 17 blockchain enabling banking rules. There was a group from the public as well as private industry that helped the banking commissioner there formulate some rules in Wyoming. Now, this is important because it brings pension funds and fidelity into crypto markets, say proponents. I say that it just protects entrepreneurs. And then, proponents will say that this is when big money can start coming in. Again, I think this is just empowers the little guy. Forget the big money. We don't care about the big money. I care more about everyday people, the people who have been disenfranchised, having free market alternatives to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, which will then prevent them from going down darker paths such as Marxism, Leninism. It's not just Wyoming where such rules are being enacted, but also Rhode Island, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. There's also countries like Malta, Switzerland, and Bermuda. So now moving forward, some things I think that I'll be keeping an eye on include privacy, not only in Bitcoin, but in crypto generally. I think Monero is an interesting project. It's a close cousin of Bitcoin in many ways, I would argue. Prospects for anonymity in crypto, fungibility, discussion around the potential solutions around fungibility, and most importantly, monetary sovereignty. Bitcoin was created for monetary sovereignty of the people, we the people, and it's lost its way. And we should return back to that original founding vision. Thanks for watching. Check out all of our work at goldsilverbitcoin.com.